Hello friends, just sharing a little bit about, I'm back in Genesis as I'm reading the book of Genesis, chapter 34. I sort of took a deep breath as I started to read this because I saw the title is The Defiling of Dinah in my version, which is ESV. So verses 1 and 2. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. Whenever I read about sexual harm coming to women in scripture, or the accounts and stories of women in the Bible who experienced, oppression or harm at the hands of others, it's always difficult. I really sort of struggled with this tonight, just because my question is, or clearly this story and account is in here for a reason. I think about Dinah, and this is all we hear about Dinah. It doesn't even say, I don't think, that she was beautiful. It actually doesn't say that. It just says that Shechem, he clearly really liked her a lot. Like, he saw her, so he saw someone beautiful. He saw someone he found physically attractive. His flesh reacted to the sight of her. So we can assume she was, but the Bible doesn't actually say even that. So I just wonder, what's the point of this, Lord? Because there's always a point, one of which I think is there's nothing new under the sun. A lot of things that happen today have happened before. Have we learned from that? I think history, or his story, is available so we can learn from it and hopefully do better. I imagine that the point is to do better. Also, it's a description of what happened. It isn't a prescription of what should happen. So clearly the Bible is showing us, because you read it and you have emotion, you feel horrified. Most of the people in 2024 reading this would read it and think, oh my gosh, like, this is awful, and therefore know, even just from that response, that wow, like, this is not good. So that's I think one of the points, that look, this is not a good thing, doing this. Women, seeing someone, seizing them, the lust of the eye, this obsessive, possessive behavior. He doesn't ever say sorry, or how can we repay you guys for what we've done? We didn't realize that this was not done in Israel, as his brothers say. In verse 31, they say, but they said, should he treat our sister like a prostitute? Like, they were really angry that he just treat her anyhow. He saw her and just assumed that he could just jump on her, that was the way she lived and that was acceptable. He didn't see her as someone's daughter, he didn't see her as someone's sister. He just saw her as an object and did as he wished with her, exerted his power, abused his power. That speaks of worldliness. That speaks of somebody who doesn't see that behavior and approach as sin. They don't see anything wrong with that, and are treating other people that way. It doesn't matter who those people are, or if you see someone as a person, and if you value them as somebody else's child, such they are connected to someone else who cares about them, even if you don't know them. There's going to be a form of respect. I think personally that you should look at everyone as human beings and treat them with honor and respect, and the scripture talks about how esteem others higher than yourselves, like hold them with value, treat them with respect and care. What are their principles? How do they live? Think about that before you're just exerting your ideas and your way upon others, and then just unrepentantly, there's nothing, because that's how you live, therefore everyone should live like that. So I'm trying to just keep to the point. So the point being, and I'd encourage you to read it, but the main things that I wanted to focus on was this verse 1, verse 26, where we see Dinah, the only daughter of Leah and the only daughter of Jacob, who is one of the patriarchs of Israel. So you have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in lineage form, that God promised he would fulfill his promise to make them a great nation, to bring his goodness, his blessing to all nations through this lineage. So Jacob is, part of this lineage who are in covenant with God, and this is his only daughter. She goes off and goes to see the women of the land. So she has a motive somehow with the women of the land. And if you know anything about the people of Israel, if you read a bit further on in the Bible, you learn that God specifically says at many points, don't mix with the other people in the land, because they worship other gods, they have practices that God doesn't agree with, and that's not how he wants the people of Israel to behave and to live. They have to be different. They are going to set the standard for all humanity going forward. So for some reason, Dinah has a motive with these people. I don't know how. The Bible doesn't say how she knows to go and meet these women, knows to go and find these women, but they're camped outside of the city. So they're in some sort of close proximity to where the women of the land would be, I imagine. And she goes off, what looks like on her own, to go and meet these women. And I'm just thinking, why? Why was that all right? Like, why did you go, Dinah? As we read on, and I guess in hindsight for her, you could see why that was a bad move. But again, this is a description of what happened. So how can we learn from this? What can we take from this? Dinah didn't see anything wrong with going to meet these women. Dinah didn't see any danger ahead. She seemed to lack discernment, wisdom, understanding, things that scripture teaches us that we need to get a hold of. There's also a fact that Jacob didn't really lead very well. If you read the rest of the story, Jacob doesn't respond when he hears the news that this has happened to Dinah. Verse 5, now Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with his livestock in the fields, so Jacob held his peace until they came. Somebody just child, like, why are you holding your peace? I'm confused. Maybe there was a fear of the people, because maybe this city were great in some way, had power and influence, not sure, and maybe he was a bit fearful. If you look at Jacob, he's quite a fearful guy, despite God meeting him several times by this point and promising and speaking to him, and Jacob starting to realize, the promises of God. He still seems to be quite afraid. So I imagine he was a bit scared and just didn't have the guts or the vim to stand up for his daughter, which makes me feel sad, but it's not the first time we've seen that. I'm pretty sure his forefathers, but something similar, not to this level, but with their wives at one point, where they didn't really stand up for them. They allowed other people to come and take them. They were hiding because of fear of people. So I think that contributes to this situation, which is something close to my heart, the role of fathers in society and community, and how the absence of fathers, male leadership, good godly men leaves this gap and absence. And this is a good example of the problem with that, when men of God are not in their position doing what they are meant to do before God, including things like protection and guidance and just being a good old deterrent to evil. Women are vulnerable. You know, you have windows of access, you know, because the men of God are not there. And I can get really passionate about this because I know this personally. And it really is something so sad, but I trust God, and I continue to find out how God heals that in my life, and how God deals with that in my life, and I'm sure I'll be able to share on my journey with you guys too. So I think Jacob wasn't being a good leader. The fact that he even waited for his sons, I don't know why. He's the leader of the household. Why didn't he just step out and draw the line right there and say, look, this is not done in Israel, we don't do this? But it took for his sons to come back and show the kind of passion and anger that you would expect. So when you read the rest of the story, Simeon and Levi in particular, who are her full brothers, because there's also other wives that Jacob had, so they were like, others would be half brothers. They were so angry. You know, they're the ones in verse 31 that said, how can he just treat our sister like a prostitute? Like, they said it right. It's not right. You know, they had the vim, they had the right response in terms of how they felt, but what they went on to do, I don't know about it. I don't know if that was the right action to take, but the anger they felt was justified. You know, like, that's how you would feel about that. I don't know why Jacob didn't. So Dinah was in this time capsule. I say that because Jacob was sent to go to Bethel by God, and he sort of stopped on the way and made a camp and rested and started having a bit of life on the way. And in this time of not actually going to where he's meant to go, I call it this sort of time capsule where people are just doing stuff. You know, the household is just doing stuff. Like, they're not actively on their journey. And if you've seen my video 6 about being in this state of readiness, continuing in this state of readiness, there was a window of access because it just created this series of conditions that the enemy could use to access Dinah and do this to her. And sadly, it was grievous. So the story sort of plays out like a trap. You know, she goes off to this place. I don't know why. Once she's there, though, it all happens so fast. Verse 2, he grabbed her, he sees her, he's laying with her, you know, he's violated her. It happens so quickly. I think within days, this whole chapter ensues. It's just so quick, so typical of evil. Just rushes you. It's really fast, really pressured, manipulative, aggressive. You know, that is more of the marks of evil. I don't see God in chapter 34. I barely see any signs of him. No one consults him. All of a sudden, I mean, we go from verse 33 at the end where he's saying he erected an altar and called it El Elohi Israel, which is the mighty God of Israel. Next verse, chapter 34, and now Dinah goes off to see the women of the land. What? Like, all of a sudden people are just not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're not following the voice or the ways of God all of a sudden. And then when you go on to read 34, you see that there's a point where God says, look, get up. Now you hear God again. Get up and go to Bethel. So that's where they should have been going. That's what they should have been doing. They weren't doing it. And sadly, because they weren't doing that, there was opportunity for evil to occur so grievously as we see it happen. In 35 verse 2, so Jacob said to his household, put away all your foreign gods, purify yourselves, change your garments. So in 34, they had foreign gods, they were not purified, and they had garments on that were not suitable to go before God. So, you know, it's like, this is why, and this is how, these are the conditions that have been created for the enemy to access Dinah. As soon as she was there, she was on the hook and she couldn't get out. And I just have a little anecdote to share with you, because when I was really trying to dig this and really trying to understand it, because I looked at it from the perspective that, oh, she's a victim. She's found herself in a situation that she never intended to be in. But she went there though, and it's gone way worse than she thought. And then the guy turns around and says that he loves her and he likes her, which is really weird, but it's sort of a Stockholm syndrome vibe. And I asked the question, well, was she really a victim? Did she go there expecting, you know, to meet a guy? Maybe she went to meet the women and she liked the way they dressed, or there was something about them that she had lust of the eyes for, that maybe she liked their fashion, maybe she liked the things that they did, maybe she was interested in their jewelry, their culture, their hairstyles, we don't know. Again, the Bible doesn't say, it just says that she went to meet them. She took her legs and went there. So there's a volition of her own in this somehow. So I tried to just step outside of myself a bit and say, okay, well, what other angles could this be seen from that might be valid? And I thought, well, maybe she was someone who did want to meet a guy, and meeting the other women was a way to meet someone, you know. Although again, I imagine that she would have known that in Israel, this is not done. You don't go and casually have sex with people as an Israelite. Like, she would have known that somehow, and even the way in which it all happened still was, the Bible's quite clear about that. Just thought, you know, what was this? Like, is there any other angle? It got me thinking about my own story, and I started to see a bit of myself in this. There was a relationship that I was in that I discovered myself in. I never intended to date this guy. I didn't look at him that way. I just was too ignorant, naive, and I had no boundaries, and I just found myself in this situation where I'm now having sex with this guy. So I think, whoa, I really started to understand her a bit, that I think women sometimes, well, a lot of women, we're in love with this idea of romance. We are in love with the idea of a romantic relationship. We're in love with this idea of it, not the reality of it. I feel like guys have a slightly stronger grip on reality here, and know that, well, look, if I'm going to meet a girl that I find sexually attractive, I'm going to want to have sex with her. But I think a lot of women who haven't had sex before go into these situations and don't fully grasp, if at all, because I didn't, what it was they are getting into. They are like talking and thinking past each other, and what happens in reality is not an informed consent situation. So I really think that's what happened to Dinah, and it's incredibly sad, but I believe there's a lot we can learn from it. One is need to have boundaries in place. She should not have been going off on her own to meet these women that I don't think her family knew. She shouldn't even have been going there, to be honest, at all. It's the same thing that happened with me. I met this guy on my own. I went to his house. I don't know why I was there, but I went there. I should not have done that. Once I was at his house, like Dinah, I was on the hook. I didn't know how to get out of that situation, and I don't think Dinah did either. I think She found herself there, and all of a sudden things were unraveling so fast, like verse 2, and before she knew it, the deed had been done. So for me, that was very tragic. I eventually grieved that situation, even though I still ended up in a relationship with this guy that lasted years, because I simply, like Dinah, didn't know how to get out of it. It was a spiritual and soul attachment that, I just discovered myself there. The same with Dinah. And in verse 26, when the brothers took revenge, Dinah was in this guy's house still, and they took her out of his house. So she was still in relationship with this guy after this whole, she would have seen how vexed her brothers were, but she was still there. And it just stinks of what happened to me, and how in my confusion and perplexity, and in how I was bamboozled, I think some people call it love bombing, you just sort of find yourself in this situation where you're behaving like somebody who is not acting in sense. Situation of lust, it was a situation of obsession. It wasn't healthy, it wasn't godly love, and it wasn't gonna last or go anywhere good. So anyway, I discovered myself there, and I think that's what happened to Dinah. My other thing is I try to be this to other girls, which is the guidance and the big sister I never had, who could spot what's going on with me from a mile off and make a beeline and inject themselves into that situation and say, hey, so as gently and as lovingly as you can, give some godly and loving wisdom. Offer to be a help in that situation. Because when I was with this guy, I literally didn't have the neural pathways or the forethought to say, okay, well, if this goes wrong, or if something happens that I don't imagine, I hadn't even thought like that. When I was there, when things were happening that I didn't really want to happen, I didn't know how to say no. And I didn't have the language to say, look, like, this is really not it. Okay, Yomi, get up, get out of this situation, leave. Like, that did not occur, and that wasn't in my vocabulary. But if I had an older sister, maybe they could have advised me when they saw me walking to church with this guy. One, why are you walking in with a guy I've never seen before? Investigate, discover. Not every guy is going to be a predator. Not every guy is going to be a dangerous situation that looks harmless. Not every, romantic situation is going to be so volatile. But I think all should be investigated, all should be tested. Ideal situation would be that both of us were accountable to somebody who was watching over what we were doing as we related to one another, if that's what we wanted to do. The other big thing was there was no plan. There was no real course of action. It was like we were just discovering, things were just unraveling. Like chapter 34 just unravels. Like, people are just doing a lot of stuff. I don't know why they're doing that stuff. They're just doing stuff. It's getting out of hand. People are killing people. People are plundering. And that's a bit like how my relationship felt. Things were just happening. None of it was intentional. Well, not by me. To be honest, I don't even know if he knew what he was doing, the guy that I was with. He just was acting upon his obsession, the fleshy feelings he had. He didn't know how to love me. There was no real guidance, and I think there has to be guidance when you're dealing with something as powerful as romance and sex. I'm trying to keep this video short, so I'm going to cut it there. And if you have any more comments or questions, do drop it in the chat section below, and I'm happy to do some more on this. But yeah, that's what I thought happened to Dinah. It's a description of her, I think, with a few boundaries, guidance, people who are a bit more intentional being in your lives, and fathers being fathers, leaders being leaders, and being there protecting those in their household, those in their care, in their stewardship, we can prevent and we can counter attack the enemy, instead of allowing them to do what we see the enemy try to do here. He grievously harmed Dinah. She got entangled in an ungodly situation that she needed to be rescued from. We go on to hear propositions made that would damage the plan of God for the people of Israel. The enemy wanted them to merge with these people, which was not the will of God for the people of Israel. It was a really ungodly, demonic attack on these guys because they were sleeping. They were just chilling in this capsule of time in between where they came from and Bethel, instead of going to Bethel. And they had started to just live a life as they think. I think there's lots to learn from this. And if I think specifically about young women who are trying to navigate life, who maybe find themselves on their own, I would encourage you to instill some boundaries, to speak to older women of God who you can trust, and get some godly advice about how to relate with love and romance. I would read the scriptures and try to take learnings from those. I would be accountable to a woman of God who can give you godly wisdom. I would not go to see the women of the land, so go to motives and things that are not of God. I would stay on Job. Like, why was that? Why was she trying to go to that motive? It was a worldly endeavor. It was a worldly focus, and it ended grievous. It was so grievous for her. You know, some mistakes are so painful and so difficult to recover from. It is better to learn from someone else than to try and just go off and make that mistake yourself. It reminded me, when I was thinking about this, about that Epstein case. There was a documentary on Netflix that I watched, and one of the things that just reverberated in my mind as I was watching it was, why did these girls go there? Why did they go to his house? Why were girls grooming other girls and bringing them there for money? Like, well, where's the guidance? Like, who was watching them? Why were they allowed? And they were young, like 16, 15, 14. Like, this screams Dinah, the story of Dinah to me. And I'm just like, what can we do? How can we learn from this story? Let's learn. Let's be our sister's keeper. Let's be older sisters to others. Some of us, that is your calling. Like, you need to be older sisters to those who don't have anyone. Let's learn from this story. This doesn't need to keep happening. Our enemy is a defeated enemy. We have the power, the tools to do better, to be better. Let's do better. Bless you. Thanks for watching.